Behold, this town. Once a seat of power for all Keyblade wielders. It is the nexus from which all worlds spring.
But this isn't what I really look like.
The world began in darkness, and from that darkness came light. From the light came the people, and the people had hearts. Evil burgeoned in those hearts, begetting more darkness. And the darkness spread across the world like a plague.
Ava had her own mission, and she carried it out.
I've heard enough! Luxu, what was your role?
I hope you like long stories.
In Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, the Master stated to Luxu that he has been witnessing Keyblade War since he was a boy, and clarified that he was mainly talking about the clashes between light and darkness, and states that he is the sole survivor. We now know that darkness was a race of beings that served as the darkness of the world, at least until Keyblade showed up. Speaking of darkness, we see that in his conversation with Luxu, as well as Luxu's conversation with the Master, that there are 13 total darknesses, 7 soon to be placed in the foretellers, 4 trapped in the data world, and 1 inside of Ventus, and 1 unaccounted for. Speaking of Luxu, we see Luxu start to take an active role with dealing with darkness. While observing the dandelions, and strangely enough, we know thanks to Elrena's Chirithy that Strelitzia in the white robe was seen walking in Daybreak Town with either Luxu or the Masters. What could all of this mean? What did the Master mean when he was talking about his past? Who was the white robed person we believe to be Strelitzia? What's going to happen with Luxu? I will attempt to answer these questions in my Kingdom Hearts Light versus Dark theory. So the last couple updates of Union Cross has everyone losing their minds and how much stuff was jam-packed in all of the story expansion. One thing is that we learned more info on the interesting race of dark beings known as Darkness. We learned that the Darkness beings once had mortal forms just like other people, but they gave up their mortal forms, and by extension their ability to have their own distinct will, in order to be unkillable and win against the light. However, once they realize that they don't have their own wills, they latch onto others, and as Luxu describes, they steal bodies. One of which is with Ventus. According to Luxu, there are 6 total darknesses beings remaining. According to Luxu, besides the 7 that will soon be placed within him and the other foretellers, there are 6 total darknesses beings remaining. One of them is in the real world and faced off against Luxu after helping Maleficent, and another is inside of Ventus, leaving the other 4 trapped in the data world thanks to our player. So what about all this? Well, as we learned in the second part of the finale, we learned that they were hiding, and as of the battle between us and Ephemer and Scold, they are now stuck between Daybreak Town and Game Central Station. Thanks to our player, we tricked them into trapping them inside Data for now at least. But we learned from the Master that there are 7 other darknesses that makes up a total of 13. The 7 deadliest ones are apparently to be placed within the foretellers, Luxu and the Master using them as scapegoats for the sole purpose of destroying them. Luxu clearly has an issue with his friends and himself being raised as scapegoats to kill darkness, and the Master calls Luxu the traitor, which makes sense considering that the first part of the finale we see Luxu fight darkness, as he states, for his own personal reasons. Now, after that, Luxu reappears to talk to Brain and do what he does, but darkness is gone. But where did darkness go? We know that darkness can't be killed, so we know Luxu didn't destroy the thing, but it's strangely enough missing. I believe that darkness simply escaped until it found its way to a suitable host, who also just so happens to be the scapegoat for Luxu to initiate the second Keyblade War, that being Xehanort. I have suggested before in previous theories that Xehanort may be under Darkness's influence. I won't really go too far into the details here, but I will bring light to the fact that we see Xehanort notice a Darkness being during one of the cutscenes in Dark Road. There's also the fact that when we see Master Xehanort fall, we see his body leaking out darkness in the exact same way as it did when darkness left Ventus's body. So then, where did the darkness go after that? Well, it's safe to assume that if we see it leave Xehanort's body, it didn't die along with him. And the reason why we didn't see it is because neither Sora, Donald, nor Goofy, nor us were aware enough to see it. Remember, darkness needs to latch on to hosts in order to gain a will, but darkness can also make themselves well hidden. So where would darkness jump to after that? Well, the only person I can see darkness jumping to after Xehanort was Sora. Why Sora? Well, probably because after darkness seeing what Sora is capable of, it probably deemed him as a suitable vessel to carry on darkness's will after Xehanort. Maybe this here has Xehanort passing more than just the Keyblade onto Sora. We just didn't realize it. Maybe this is why Sora was so driven to save Kairi and was so willing to do what he did, because as we have seen, darkness can amplify a person's desires enough to make them do certain things. By latching on to Sora before he does what he does to get himself banished to the world of Unreality, darkness now has a clear one-way trip over to Unreality and is free to do whatever it wants over there. Maybe there's another reason darkness would latch on to Sora. Maybe darkness recognized him as something or someone at the last second. Is it possible that Sora might be the reincarnation of Ephemer? Now, I know this is kind of sounding far-fetched, and I know someone else has mentioned this before in their video, but this is something that is being thrown around the Kingdom Hearts community now with the revelation that Xehanort is actually the player reincarnated, and shows that reincarnation in Kingdom Hearts is a thing now. And it's not like there isn't any evidence to go with this. First off, the clothing and running style of both Ephemer and Sora are very similar. Second is the fact that Ephemer encounters Sora during Kingdom Hearts 3 and helps him out by lending him the power of the sleeping dandelions. No one else was able to see this encounter. And third, and probably the most damning piece of evidence, remember when Ventus was being left to die in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep and Sora's newborn heart saves him? Remember the particular wording that Sora uses. That wording makes it sound as if it is a fully intelligent and powerful heart moving towards a new reincarnated baby, aka Sora. This is exactly what happened when the player refused to sleep and chose to reincarnate. This would explain a few things, like why exactly a newborn heart chose to save Ven, and why Sora and Ven are so connected. It's because Ven was friends with his previous incarnation. This could also be backed up by Xehanort saying,
You make me think of an old friend.
because it's both the Xehanort in him as well as the player, referring to both Ephemer and Ericus respectively. Let's not forget the fact that Ephemer's name stems from the word ephemera, which has a meaning of short-lived, as in Ephemer's time as Ephemer is short-lived, and he will reincarnate into Sora. There is also the fact that the Master's Defender Keyblade sought out Sora to help Aqua, as remember, Keyblades pick and choose who they want to have wield them, and it would make sense for it to go to Sora, considering that Sora is the reincarnation of the person who was originally meant to wield the Keyblade in the first place, and the one who wielded it forming Scala and Kylum. But either way, with darkness latching on to Sora, it now has easy access to the entire world of Unreality, and is now free to try and infect this whole new world, to make an army of people that could face off against the Master. Maybe that's why the Master is right near Sora in the Kingdom Hearts 3 secret ending, because no matter where he goes, darkness is always there. Speaking of the Master, we learn more about him in the last Kingdom Hearts Unicross story updates than I expected. The Master seems to have a personal grudge against darkness, which is why he is willing to go through such great lengths to eradicate darkness. Remember, according to him, he and darkness have been in a Keyblade war since he was a boy, and he is apparently the last person to survive the struggles. But why fight in the first place? One could argue that it's the typical or cliche darkness wants to rule all, but maybe there's more to it than that. I also thought about something. If the world started off with beings of darkness, then there must be beings of light, right? It only makes sense. It's unclear of the nature of these light beings, if they do exist, and what exactly their gimmick and everything is, but it's clear to me that there's a good chance that the Master might be one of these beings of light. Remember, when the Master decides to tell Xehanort his name, while we don't hear his name, we do see a flash of light, when we see him talk about his name. There's also the fact that in response to Lushu saying that the master isn't fond of beings of darkness, darkness in response says it isn't fond of beings of light. What I am suggesting with all of this is that maybe the light beings attempted to snuff out darkness in order to preserve light and essentially initiated a war to kill them off, but this only angered the darkness. Remember how the age of fairy tales is described by people like Kyrie's grandma? Heck, they even show it in the first cutscene of Union Cross. That the war started because people wanted to keep the light for themselves. While yes, we do see this in Kingdom Hearts Key with people fighting over the ownership of light, there's an interesting detail that we don't see, and that is the part of the story that says that the world was saved from the hearts of children. My guess is that maybe the children that Kyrie's grandma is describing when she's talking about the story is referring to the foretellers, who are able to house 7 of the 13 darknesses that apparently are the most dangerous ones, and that would keep the world from falling to shadow. Is the Master going to be the only being of light we see? Probably not. I think we will definitely see 1 to 2 more light beings, at least in the future. First, I want to mention Strelitzia. So during the first half of the finale of Union Cross, Elrena's Charity says it spotted someone who looked like Strelitzia but was wearing a white robe with someone in a black coat. The only 2 suspects for someone in a black coat at that time is either Lushu or the Master of Masters. Thanks to what Lushu states in part 2, it's easier to point the finger at the Master of Masters for now at least. But why was the Master of Masters with Strelitzia in a white robe? For recruiting. The Master was probably able to save Strelitzia from complete death, but simply brought her back as a light being and is having her assist him against darkness, and Strelitzia would be able to gain revenge against darkness. 2 things would really support this whole idea. First is the fact that we see Strelitzia in part 1, but not in part 2, meaning that she is definitely going to be relevant at some point in the future of the series. Second, when Larian found himself falling into anger and despair, Strelitzia communicated with him briefly, as well as in his dream in the same robe. Her heart is still able to connect to her brother. That wouldn't be possible if she were dead. Second person who is probably the least important right now when it comes to guessing the light beings is the Varamrex girl. I suspect the Varamrex girl may also be a being of light, simply because I have been suspecting for a while now who was the culprit of who stole her form. Fairy Godmother stated that her form was stolen from her, and if she were to try and return home, her heart would also be stolen. And I believe Darkness stole her form. Lushu does state darkness just steals bodies, but I know what you may be thinking. Hold on, Noir, how does that make sense? According to the Master, there are 13 darknesses, 7 locked away, 1 in Ventus, 1 in the real world, and 4 stuck in the Day to Daybreak town, and you said one of those might be latched onto Sora. There's 13 total. How could darkness do this? Simple. The answer is Darklings. Remember, darkness has access to Darklings, and Darklings are Keyblade wielders who fell to darkness. Maybe darkness took advantage of the fact that darkness were Keyblade wielders and had them open up a gate to have them travel to Unreality. I suspect Game Central Station may be an unknown bridge between reality and unreality. Let's also not forget the fact that on the Kingdom Hearts 3 box art, we see a Darkling, strangely enough, on the Kingdom Hearts 3 box art, holding a star. And when we think of stars in Kingdom Hearts 3, the only 2 people that come to mind are Naminé and the Varamrex girl. But Naminé is right there on the box. So that star must represent the Varamrex girl. And there's also the fact that we never ever encountered a Darkling in Kingdom Hearts 3. But going back to Game Central Station, we have seen something like this before, where you have to take weird paths in order to get to a certain realm or something of the sort. Let's not forget that in order for us to get to the world that never was, we need to use a bridge located in Data Twilight Town. Let's also not forget the fact that Game Central Station is Ralph's world, and the first time we see Ralph is with the Heartbinder from the toy box, coincidentally right after we visit the world of Varamrex. Maybe that was a hint. Remember, there are 4 darknesses that are trapped at Game Central Station, and if they use Game Central Station as a bridge to Unreality, the 4 of them could infect anyone in Unreality. And who would they infect? The 4 people we see in the Varamrex commercial: Magia, Aegis, the girl, and Yuzora. Remember when Yozora said his current appearance wasn't his own? Maybe because darkness stole his form. But then why would he appear in the same way in the Vermex trailer as he does when he fights us? Well, interestingly enough, we learned from the Master that not only do voices not reach in Unreality, but eyes don't either. Not fully sure what the eyes thing really means, but if I were to guess, I guess that means that you can't view things from Unreality the way you're supposed to unless you are fully there. So maybe Sora, not being fully there yet, stuck in a dream in Unreality, was able to see Yozora for his true appearance, while Yozora believes that Sora can only see him the way everyone else currently sees him. And yes, that probably also means that the person watching Riku in the Kingdom Hearts 3 Secret Ending is Darkness and not Yozora. Now that the four Darknesses are in Unreality, they are free to infect, but of course, with the Master there, he will attempt to stop them. So who should we side with? The Darkness or the Master? I think our next established goal will be to stop the Darkness from plaguing everything and going too far, while stopping Light from sniffing out all darkness. But there's still some things left up in the air. Like for instance, what's the deal with the two Brains? Near the end of the second part of the Union Cross finale, we see Luxu approach Brain. After getting some necessary info out of him, Luxu admits that letting Brain die in such a time period in such conditions would be a complete waste. We never directly see what Luxu does to Brain, but right after, where we see all people who end up using the Ark end up, Larium ended up in Dwarf Woodlands and woke up, Elrena was knocked down to Enchanted Dominion, and Ventus was asleep in the Keyblade Graveyard with someone approaching him. More on this later. But shortly after, we see in the Badlands Luxu walking with the box and his Keyblade, which turns out to be a recreation of the final scene from Keyback cover. Then surprisingly, we see Luxu remove his hood and he has Brain's face, meaning he possessed Brain's body. But according to what we know, Luxu didn't need to do that. He simply needed to pass on his Keyblade to an apprentice, and then from that apprentice to their apprentice until the Scapegoat arrived. Luxu possessing Brain's body is puzzling, and we know that this is Luxu possessing Brain's body because we see right after Brain waking up in Scarlet Kylum. And the way he speaks, we know it's Brain. So how is this possible? Well, don't forget that there's still another arc that wasn't used because it was meant for our player, but of course we didn't make it. So Luxu probably brought the arc back into the real world, hijacked Brain's body, and then sent his heart in the arc and then forward in time. But why would Luxu do this? Because he is the traitor, like I mentioned earlier. Luxu is only partially following the Master's plan, while he is also deviating from his task. Remember, Luxu wasn't meant to do anything in regards to anything involving the Keyblade Wielders or the Union leaders or anything like that. He was only meant to be an observer. But the fact that he's out there fighting darkness, the fact that he's out there sending a true dandelion, the fact that he is out there possessing Brain's body and doing whatever he does, it's very clear that he is the traitor because he is deviating from his task. And we also know that he is the traitor because the Master straight up says that he is, and not to mention, there's some more things that hint towards Luxu doing something treacherous for one reason or another. Firstly, during Ava's convo with Luxu, remember how the traitor is described as someone with a single strike will toll the bells and herald the end. Well, Luxu shouldn't have participated in any battle. The Master told him not to. But the second he was accused of being the traitor, he summoned his Keyblade. While yes, Ava may have dealt the first strike and was the aggressor, Luxu summoning his Keyblade made it clear that he was very much ready to fight, something the Master told him not to do. Not only that, but I just recently made a huge realization. So thanks to the Union Cross finale, we have now seen the entire conversation where the Master gives Luxu his role. And I noticed that the Master doesn't say a word about using an arc for a true dandelion. So the true dandelion will be the one the Master needs, but doesn't know that they may have the power to eradicate darkness. But I realize I'm digressing, so let's get back to Brain. What reason, true reason, would Luxu have to possess Brain's body? To allow Brain to jump forward in time into the future and assist him so that he can further assist Luxu. By taking Brain's body and leaving Brain as just a heart, and as a heart he can travel in the arc no problem, Luxu lives out his life to the point in time when Brain would appear, and using his hat as a medium to bring him back. So that leads into what Luxu was planning by doing all of this, to gain help in killing darkness without the need to sacrifice himself or his friends. Remember, the master stated at the time of his convo with Luxu, darkness isn't in the foretellers yet. Luxu is still helping out the master, but he is attempting to deviate from his role to alter it so he won't need to sacrifice himself. Maybe that would help explain Luxu telling Sora how dumb the concept of self-sacrifice is in Kingdom Hearts 3. Because of his exposure to everything, he doesn't agree with the concept. So Luxu would leave Brain to wake up in the future of Scarlet Kylam and encourage him to have descendants so that they would indoctrinate teachings of killing darkness. Maybe that would explain Ericus's bigoted view towards the darkness, because his family would teach him the dangers of not specifically the concept of darkness itself, but the darkness beings that could control other people. But years down the line between the concept of darkness and the darkness beings were blurred. We know Ericus learned it from whoever's brainchild is, because Ericus admits he never met his grandfather and doesn't even know what happened to him. But thanks to Brain having a family that sowed the seeds for strong keyblade wielders to be born and increased the potential of wiping out darkness without the need for Luxu and the others to let themselves be taken. Maybe Brain's teachings to his family would lead to a series of events where a keyblade wielder can find themselves capable of accepting a tremendous power that would be enough to wipe out darkness. And that person might be Sora. Now, I know I mentioned that darkness would latch onto Sora, but first off, we don't know how long darkness would plan to latch onto Sora, and I doubt that darkness would even know that Sora is going to accept this power that would later kill it. That might be what Xigbar was talking about in this cutscene.
Accept the power you're given.
But what happened to Brain? Well, any number of things could have happened to him, so it would be a little ridiculous to try and pinpoint what exactly happened to him, since there's a few possibilities. But I will say it's very likely that Brain is still alive out there somewhere. We just don't know it. Maybe that's why they were able to reproduce the arcs that would later be used for Xehanort sending Kairi off to Destiny Islands, as Brain is extremely intelligent. So he would be able to learn about the arcs by reverse engineering it and then making more. Remember when we see Ephemer wake up in Daybreak Town's ruins before he built Scarlet Kylam? His arc is still in perfect condition, so Brain could simply use that as his way of reproducing them. Speaking of people that use the arc, back on Ventus, when he arrives in the Keyblade graveyard, we see Ventus completely passed out, and we see a shadowy figure approach him. The obvious guess to who this person is Master Xehanort, considering that we see the earliest moment of Birth by Sleep is Xehanort trying to drive the darkness out of Ventus, but look at the way the person moves. That's a bit too agile in their step for an 80-year-old Xehanort. Also, most if not all Kingdom Hearts players would guess that that is Xehanort, so why go through the trouble of hiding their identity, unless it isn't who we think it is? My guess on who that person is, it could be two people who could possibly be this person. That's either the Masters or Brain. It could be the Master, because we know that the Master spent some time in his reality before leaving, and he could have recognized Ven as the one chosen to inherit darkness, knew one of the darkness beings was in him, and delivered him to Xehanort to help push Xehanort down the path he needs to go down. The only other person I could think of is Brain, simply because I believe that Brain could potentially run into Ven and deliver him to Xehanort in the hopes of having Xehanort rip the darkness out of his friend. Brain might actually be the person Xehanort learned how to remove hearts from. But then where does that leave the current state of Kingdom Hearts? I think that in order to find that out, we need to go back to a scene I mentioned earlier, when Luxu talks to Sora about the reward being right around the corner, and he needs to accept the power given to him and find the hearts joined to his. I know I talked about this before in my Sora's reward theory, but I think this scene could be interpreted another way. Like I mentioned earlier, Sora is probably a Keyblade wielder capable of wielding tremendous power to wipe out darkness and the Keyblade War conflict, but Sora may not be the only one. The power may spread to several other people, and that would make his art joined to theirs. Or maybe this power is that of darkness, and Luxu is aware of it. By accepting the power, Sora will serve as a scapegoat for wiping out the darkness. I know this is getting a little confusing, guys. But Sora is definitely a prime candidate for receiving a tremendous power to wipe out darkness. Now, what Sora chooses to do with this power is completely up to him. Like I said, the conflict will probably reach a point where Sora needs to decide whether or not he will side with darkness and wipe out light, or side with light and help stop darkness. But with that being said, that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this theory. I know this took a while for me to push this out. This was initially going to be a two-parter, but then I decided at the last minute to just make the whole theory all together. Not to mention, I have been very busy with things like school and doing more things in my life, so I apologize for things taking so long to come out. But now we have this video and a couple other videos I'm planning to release soon. So be on the lookout for that. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you guys rate, comment, and subscribe. Check out my Twitter, my Twitch. Check out my Discord server. The link will be in the description below. This has been Noir Low Bomber, and I'm out.